Hey guys. So in today's episode, my solo episode, I am dropping a guest appearance on the Stronger Dads Collective podcast hosted by Hayden Prichard. He was actually on the podcast. If you enjoy this episode and you want to go check him out, he was on episode 542, Strength versus Muscle Growth. So Hayden is real big into strength. He's a great coach. He's has his PhD as well too. So definitely go check out that episode. But in this episode, basically we talk about how becoming a parent has shaped my approach to training and how I've handled the challenges that come with these early days of fatherhood. We also talk a lot about fundamentals of improving our body composition and focusing on the big rocks that we need to nail down. So we take a deep dive into everything around body composition. You get to hear a little bit about my story as well as some struggles that I'm having currently in terms of being a new father. So if you are interested in that, make sure you go check out this episode. Make sure you follow Hayden's podcast as well too. Let me know how you guys like these episodes where I post the replay of other podcasts that I'm a guest on. So again, enjoy the episode and chat with you guys soon.
Kia ora and welcome to episode 89 of the Stronger Dads Collective podcast. Today, I have a special guest. I have recently appeared on his podcast and he's returning the favor for me and coming on to mine. So today I'm joined by Jeff Hayne, and he is a recomp coach and predominantly works, I believe, with people in their 30s or older. Probably fairly similar to my target audience, I would say there. He's also a husband and father of one, and he is very fresh to the game of fatherhood, or the life of fatherhood, we should say. So I'm really looking forward to getting some real-time insights into how life has changed, how training has changed with a brand new baby in the house. So it's a pleasure to have you on, mate. How are you going?
Hayden, thanks for having me on, man. Yeah, it was fun chatting with you. You are going to end up providing more information on my podcast than I'm going to here, but I'm looking forward to chatting with you, man. It was a great episode. It was really fun. Like I said, off air, we were able to connect and we had good conversation. And so, yeah, when you asked me to come on, man, I was like, yep, absolutely. Would love to hop on here. I've been reading your stuff on reps. So you always provide great information. It's an honor to be on this podcast.
Cool, man. Appreciate it. It's always funny as a Kiwi. We have a thing over here called tall poppy syndrome. And I'm not sure if you've heard of that. I don't think it's quite as common in the United States, but basically whenever you are doing something that is, people might give you praise for or say, oh, you're doing well with this. You just want to cut yourself down, but you got to cut the tall poppy down. So it's quite common in New Zealand that as soon as anyone has success, people are, oh, but such and such, or he came from this background or that. So we love to do that. And then when we get a little bit of, oh, he's saying nice things about me, you try and find a way to cut yourself down. So I'll try not to do that. Just say I appreciate it.
Hey, here in the States, I feel like it's more the other way, right? You have some people that they do the same thing, but you also have a lot of people that are like, yeah, you're right. I do this and I do that. And they're trying to build themselves up a ton too. But there's a happy medium with it, right? You got to build yourself up at least a little bit, but you can go to the extreme with it as well. So
yeah, I think it's a humble medium is probably the place to be. So no, anyway, mate, we will move on and stop talking about me. How have these first few months been for you of fatherhood? Obviously, you've trained for many years. We mentioned off air that you had done a couple of bodybuilding shows back in the day. And obviously being a recomp coach, I imagine you have to stay in pretty good shape most of the time to not sell the product, but demonstrate that you can practice what you preach, so to speak. How has that kind of been for you with that change? Because you've probably coached parents before, but what's it like now when the shoe is on your foot and you're in that tough space or potentially tough space? I don't know. You might have a sleeper.
yeah, from what you only know what you know, right? Like you have your first kid, that's your only experience to go off of other than what other people told you. But I think for the most part, my son, his name's Colby. So he's born. Yeah. But he just had his 4 month recently. And I think overall, based on what I've heard and just experienced with him, I feel like he's a pretty good sleeper. I think we got pretty lucky. Even the best baby sleepers, still, it's a huge adjustment period, no matter what. Like you're still in the first couple weeks, months, you're still waking up 3 times a night. That's a challenge. So that was definitely an adjustment there with that. But I feel like now, I mean, he sleeps mostly all night. And so that's good, right? But I definitely can tell how I feel from day to day. I just feel like I at night, I'm like way more tired. Like I usually have, I always told myself that I haven't told myself, but I've always felt like I'm someone who, like, I sleep good, but I also don't necessarily feel like I always have the energy, and I definitely can feel now at the end of the day where, man, there's some nights where I'm just like laying there and I'm just like so freaking tired. It's just like this whole body, just tiredness there. So that's definitely been a little bit of an adjustment on there, and just feeling it throughout the day. Like I'll be doing like calls with clients or Loom videos for check-ins, and I'll find myself like yawning in the middle of it, stuff like that. Training too, definitely have felt a little less motivated to train in general. Like I have to go train a little bit more than I feel like I have in the past. So it's interesting to see how sleep can impact those things, because that was just something that I always would tell people. But now that I'm actually experiencing that, I can see that firsthand where if you're not aware of it, you could see how that would impact your day to day. You think there's something wrong with you, but sleep definitely plays a huge role with that. So again, just a little less motivated. I've also found too that I like to track my resting heart rate, and I've definitely found, at least recently, initially it wasn't too bad, but recently it's been a little bit higher. I don't know if that's like just the time of year here. Obviously in the States, it's winter time, it's super cold. So I don't know if that has something to do with it. Shorter days, it's getting dark like super early, not getting dark out till 7 a.m. But I've noticed that be a little bit higher. And I think that all goes hand in hand with everything. So it's been an adjustment for that part. I'm someone who loves sleep and trying to maximize that as much as I can. So that has definitely been a big adjustment. But having a wife that is she is a great mother, and so she has to breastfeed him and everything. So that definitely helps out. And I've been able to get a baby bank a little bit more sleep than she has overall because of that. So to me, that's been the biggest adjustment, just how I feel from day to day.
Yeah, it's interesting. And like what you say about almost those subtle shifts that you might not necessarily, if it was anything else that had affected the sleep, like it's not as obvious as, hey, I had a kid 4 months ago. Like obviously I'm expecting to be a little bit more tired. But sometimes it'll be a shuttle shift where there's like stress at work, or there's something that's just a little bit, but it affects your sleep subtly. And then, as you mentioned, that will impact your motivation, that'll impact your desire to train. All of these little bits that kind of like, although it's a small thing, it can compound if you don't almost become aware of it and keep some of those habits. And so it's interesting to hear like your job is a coach. So you're always talking about this stuff and doing this stuff. But like when you're in this environment, and oftentimes when I mentioned about those things like work stress, for me in the past, when something like that has happened, it's always been something I haven't noticed at the time. And it's been like retrospectively, I've looked back and been like, that's why it was stalled, or that's why I was feeling that a little bit more niggle in my lower back. It was because I had the stress from work plus less sleep, and it compounds. So I guess the benefit of parenthood is it doesn't sneak up on you as such. You can,
You mentioned that. I could definitely tell from a recovery point too. That's a little bit slower as well too, for sure. Like I've had a little bit of elbow tendonitis, and that seems to be something that in the past it would just, I don't want to say figure itself out, but it happened a little bit quicker, whereas this has just been lingering a little bit more. And then I think too, so the training I like to do is I love hypertrophy training. Like that's, you said I like recomp. And so for me, adding muscle has always been my big like goal. I've loved that. I've loved a, muscular physique, and that's something I've always wanted to chase. I'm sure we'll talk about how my training views have changed slightly in terms of how I exactly go about it, but that's the type of training I love, right? So hypertrophy style training there. And I can definitely tell that we talk about how sleep has those like subtle changes to how you train, motivation and stuff. And I've also just found too, I feel like you gas out just like a little bit sooner. I feel like too, it's maybe just for example, like 8 reps of something was like 2 RIR, whereas now it feels closer to 0 to 1 RIR, just to give like a blanket example. You hit that, I feel like that RIR a little bit sooner there. So I can definitely see those little like small things. And I think again, in the short term, that's probably not a big deal. For months on end, that could be something that adds up. But the good news is, as we know, if you're lifting, it's really hard to lose muscle. That's been my philosophy like during this time is, okay, I'm probably not setting myself up to maximize muscle gain right now, but that's okay as long as I'm not really losing anything. And I think in the past, I would have freaked out about this, but I know just having a general understanding of the research, it's okay. Hey, if you're lifting, you're probably not losing muscle if you're hitting the big rocks. And so for me, those were the big things I wanted to focus on, were the big rocks of, okay, what's going to allow me to put me in the best position to, at the very least, maintain, potentially add a little bit, but just understanding that that's probably going to be super slow at this point in time. And it's more so about, hey, just maintaining that through this really challenging time or transition period, not really challenging. There's a lot worse things out there, but just a transition period.
Yeah. I like to think of it as like a season that you're in, right? Like it's not going to be this way for Colby's not going to be 4 months or fresh newborn type phase for that long. It will change. It may get better. It may get worse. So you got to be prepared for everything. But within a few years, fingers crossed, he'll be sleeping pretty good, hopefully, and it won't be as different, and or you will just be used to operating in this mode, right? And you'll have established these new habits and routines that work regardless of how you might feel. But let's go back a little bit further even, man, and have a bit of a chat about your upbringing. Tell us a little bit about where you're from, what it was like growing up for you, and just take us through that story of how you got, and go as deep as you want, but childhood right up to how did you end up getting into this role of being a recomp coach, a health coach? What was the journey like for you?
Yeah. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. So I don't know where your listeners, you're from New Zealand. So I would imagine you probably have a good base from there. So if anyone's not familiar, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. It's basically right in the middle of the United States. So like you, if you're from out of the United States, you would probably never come here unless you had family here or there was like some work thing that you had going on here. Otherwise, you're probably not coming to St. Louis, Missouri ever. I was born and raised here. I've always lived here. I love it. It's not as flashy as like Los Angeles or New York City or it's stuff like that. The weather's not as good, but again, it's a nice kind of like small, like not small town, decently sized. It's got enough and everything like that. So that's where I've lived my entire life, other than when I went to college for a few years. Went to a college just a couple hours away. But yeah, how I got into all this stuff. I always played sports. I always loved sports. So I'd say that obviously got me into working on yourself. I think that's sports teaches you that, right? So I was always around like being active and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I'm short, so I'm 5'7", and when I was younger, I was also super skinny. Okay, so I was like a short, super skinny kid. People would call me shrimp, stuff like that. And you played sports, and obviously sports, it's better for people who are 6'2", a little bit heavier. There was that. So that was always something I was self-conscious about. And I remember I first got into lifting weights. My dad had this like super old gym equipment set. Like we're talking like from the 80s, and it was like the dumbbells that you had to screw it on and screw it off. But I remember, man, I just freaking loved it. And I would just do a ton of curls. He had the straight bar. So I just literally, all I did was push-ups and curls when I got started. So that was like my intro into it. Yep. And then obviously when I got into high school, we had some, I took a weight training class, and we did some weight training for sports. And again, I always tell people, me and my buddy who played baseball with me, we would work out together. And a lot of people in the weight training class didn't really do anything, but the two things we did were we would squat and we would do curls. And those were like the two things. So we literally did legs and biceps.
Not a bad combo, man.
Yeah. Back then it was like, hey, if you do squats, you're just going to grow everything, testosterone. But yeah, we would do those two things. And funny story, as I got further into like weight training, like my two strong points are my quads and my biceps. And looking back at my training, it's like, makes sense a little. So that was my intro into it. I actually really hated out. I didn't mind like the weight training side of things, but I really hated like working out for sports. Like I just never really wanted to do it. Like the conditioning side of things. Again, the weight training side was fine. That was definitely my favorite. But then once I got to college and stuff like that, I got a gym membership. I started going by myself, and I just really fell in love with the process of weight training and going to the gym. Initially, I had to go with my buddies. I couldn't go by myself, but eventually got over that at some point. But that was my intro into it. Actually, when I went to college, I didn't think I would be in fitness and nutrition. I wanted to be like in sports. Like I wanted to do some job in sports. But again, that obviously didn't work out. So when I first went there, it was called entertainment management. So it's like essentially you're like usually the intro into it's like you do like ticket sales, right? And then you try to work your way up. My ultimate goal was like, oh man, I'd love to be like a scout or like in the front office or something. But again, usually those types of positions I feel like are, hey, you had to play that sport or you have to like really know somebody. So I gave up on that, and I just ended up getting my business degree, got out of college, got a job as a assistant gym manager. And so literally that job was just like, hey, training the staff, making sure the gym was clean, and like bringing in members, right, for this chain gym. Really no like training or anything like that. I did that for 2 to 3 years, got promoted to gym manager, and people would just come in and you'd have these conversations to sign people up, and you'd have a great conversation with them. And then all of a sudden they would be super excited to start. And the next thing you know, you'd never see these people again. So it was like kind of super demotivating, and I didn't really do anything with the training side of things. And I always knew that deep down, like I really enjoyed that, but I didn't really have a ton of knowledge towards it. Like I had worked out myself, but I didn't really have a ton of knowledge to apply it to other people. So I ended up deciding, hey, I'm going to I quit my full-time job as a gym manager, and I went to be a personal trainer. And so I think I was like 26 at the time. And basically that was like, I had a full-time job income coming in to being a personal trainer. And this training company I worked for, it was like, you only got paid for your clients and the sessions that you did. So I basically went at 26 full-time income to not really making any money. Like I remember the first paycheck I got, it was like $300, and I worked like 80 hours. And I was just like, holy crap, man. Like what did I do? But I always had this deep down, like this is what I wanted to do. It's a weird thing to explain now because again, I'm fortunate to be able to make a living off of it. But like back then, I always try to put myself there. I'm like, man, I can't believe I actually because there was just so many reasons why I felt like I should have given up, but I just like deep down knew that this is what I wanted to do. And really since then, like I love the science. I love learning about the human body. Again, like my big things I love are like hypertrophy, metabolism, really getting into the like conditioning side of things. I think that's super interesting stuff. But that's How I got into this, I can go into like kind of my fitness journey and what that looks like if you want me to hit on that. I'm a little bit more. I don't know if you, how deep you want me to go with that.
Yeah. Were your parents or siblings or anything active, or did you have to do it yourself?
Yeah, do it myself. My parents definitely, they're in that like they're in their 60s, so they're in that generation where most people I feel like didn't really take care of them. Like it just wasn't as important now, so they didn't really take care of themselves from that standpoint. My dad's like somewhat active, but he's got the typical American eating, the standard American diet eating habits there. So that was definitely something I kind of had to unlearn and teach myself there with that. And again, those things, how you grow up is I can see where if I'd never got into this, how again, some habits that I like learned then, I could see how they carry over into your adult
Mm.
life. And it can be a vicious cycle if that's how you're brought up. Again, I love my parents. Like I don't have no ill will feelings towards them or anything like that. But again, they will tell me too, hey, we didn't teach you the greatest like sleep or like nutrition habits or anything like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting. Interesting. And then when you did your PT training thing, did you do a short course or something like that got you a ticket to get into it? Or did you have to
Yep.
go back and start doing a degree again? What did that look like?
Yep. So here in the States, you really it depends on the place where you get a job. So like
Yeah.
the place I wanted to get a job at, they required like certain ones. I ended up getting my NASM. I'm not
Yeah.
sure. I think it's a worldwide
They do
certification.
it down here too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So that was the certification I got was NASM. And this is a long story, but I got it in between the time that I quit my job and started personal training. Yeah. So there's a little story in there in that the company I went to work for was actually a subcontracted company within that chain gym that I was the
Mm.
manager at. And they wouldn't let me train for 3 months. That was part of the story I left out. They wouldn't let me train for 3 months because they
Oh.
didn't want me switching over. They thought that I was going to like other managers were going to do that. And so they ended up not letting me do that. So in that period of time, I was able to really study and get my
Yeah.
certification there. So
And so you had to go coach at a different gym there as well then, so you didn't have any of the relationship with the clientele or anything like that to give you a leg up at the start?
yep. So it was a chain gym here in St. Louis, and I did have to go to another location. It was like still within 5 miles, but I did have to go to another location there with that. So yes, I did have to go meet like all new members and everything like that.
Okay. And then obviously from my perspective as a coach, I'm a little bit intrigued as to how you ended up transitioning from doing in person to going into that online space, and I guess get a little bit of an understanding of the rationale behind that, but then the practicality for you in making that happen. Was that something that started with you were giving some of your in-person clients some programming online that they could follow, and then that kind of just naturally built? Or was it something you actively were like, hey, I'm limited by the number of people I can see in the hours I have in a day, travel, blah, blah, blah. And there needs to be a more economical way. What did that kind of look like in terms of decision making for you there?
Yeah, so I got super lucky that when I first transitioned to being a personal trainer, the personal trainer I hired, he was actually like he basically was telling me about, hey, like you could do this online training. I'm like, online training? What the hell is that even going to work out? And so he was the one, and we initially had started a company together, and that was again like a side gig there. So that got me
Mm.
into it. I eventually went out on my own, but that was like hey, I was starting my personal training fresh in person, but I also was starting that as well too because he talked to me into doing that. I wasn't aware of it. So it was
Mm.
always, I got lucky that he did that because then that was always something that I was building on the side as well too. So how that worked out is I was getting all my in-person clients from that company. So like they took like half of what the client paid and they would do like the marketing and you just literally had to do a free session with them and then you tried to sell them on a long-term package. And I got a lot of clients through that. I wasn't supposed to do this, but I was like, hey, if you don't want to continue, you like the app that I use, I can still write your programs for you. So I got a few clients that way and then just started posting on social media, just like just help, like looking back now, I was like super simple tips, got people to like look into me a little bit more and be like, hey, I'm interested in what you're doing. And so I was able to just slowly build it from there. So again, it was like probably 100% in-person training. And then over time, it just slowly shifted from 80-20, 75-25, 50-50. And then eventually once I got to 75% online, 25% in person, I got to the point to where I was like, man, I'm just like I enjoyed the in-person stuff, but I just got to the point to where I was, man, I'm just like counting reps for people. And it just felt like a inefficient use of my time because I really like the education behind
Yeah.
everything and learning more about that. And so I just felt like online was a little bit better for me. So I eventually made the full-time switch to that. So
Yeah.
that's how I got into just virtual online coaching.
And then with what you do, you mentioned there about education, like what does your coaching process look like? And As I say before this, I go with the flow of these conversations, but I'm interested in this topic. So I'm going to ask a few questions about it. But what does your coaching process look like? Because you mentioned education being a thing that you like to prioritize. And obviously having a podcast with, what did we say, like 600 odd episodes, education
100,000.
and learning, 100,000. Yeah, the most number of episodes of any podcast. How do you incorporate that into your coaching process?
Like the education piece. How do I do that? Yeah.
And just the general, what does your coaching process look like? What is it that people are signing up for? And then also just that little bit of an understanding around the education and incorporating that.
Yeah. The coaching process is, I always want to have an initial kind of conversation with a potential client just to see where they're at. Then we see if it's a good fit, fill out a form, and then you get an idea as you do it more and more. You get an idea of where people are starting. So I have this like intro phase where it's like, hey, the first 4 weeks, you're going to see results if you stick to this, but a lot of it's just figuring out what your biggest like limiting factors are. Because again, I feel like the people I work with, it's like they've worked out before, they've been working out, but it's just like, for whatever reason, they're putting in the time and they're just like not reaping the rewards for how much time they're putting in. And so usually with these types of people and just anybody in general, there's always at least one to two things that people aren't realizing that is setting them back, whether that be like, hey, you're training, but again, it's not really geared towards hypertrophy. So we could maximize that a little bit. Or it's, hey, your nutrition, you're tracking your calories, but you're not adherent to it. Or your macros are off, or you can improve your food quality, or I'm sure you see this. It's like things outside of the gym are huge, right? We talked about sleep. It's maybe that's way off. Or again, maybe they're just like putting so much stress on their body that that's your big thing. You actually need to dial back on some stuff and we need to work on that. Or another big one is mindset, right? A lot of people like that usually have this like perfection mindset. And that's the big thing that's holding them back. So it's like that first initial stage is figuring out where they're at. And usually what I preach to people is most people haven't dialed in all those things to where you have some runway to quote unquote recomp, where it's like, hey, you need to work on the body composition side of things. And so from there, that's where we figure out like, hey, do we need to be maybe in a small surplus? Do we need to be at maintenance? Is it a small deficit? What can you stick to? And then that helps figure out which direction we go while we continue to work on a lot of those things outside of the gym. Because I feel like a lot of times when it comes to changing your body composition, stuff like that, it's too much focus is on like changing your body, scale weights, and people overlook some of those important things like your overall health, how are things outside of the gym and things like that. So that's usually where my clientele comes with me and how the coaching process kinds of work. I don't know if you want to go into like specifics of what week to week looks like, or
I guess you mentioned something else there that I would like to jump into a little bit as well, as the health aspect. And given that your target demographic is people who are 30 plus as well, how do you incorporate that into the process? Is that part of the training thing, or is that in conversations you're talking about some of these health promoting activities? And then I guess when you're working with people who might primarily be like yourself, you mentioned about the lifting side being a real big focus. Do you include conditioning in what you do? How does that work?
Yeah. So the health side of things, it's like through check-ins. So I'll have clients track like just the idea like how's your sleep for the week? Again, some of that is like very subjective. So you do need to dive into it more. So I do like to see, hey, when they're sleeping, and then that usually opens up conversations. But it's also, hey, for example, how hungry are you? Okay, so you are super hungry that day. Let's look into it. Just opens the door for like further questions about what's going on. And then obviously like over time through communication, you start to figure out, okay, here's where somebody's overlooking. So for example, if to me, if you don't feel great throughout the day, you're like taking you a long time to recover, something like your digestion's off, stress is super high. It's okay. So we have a lot of things that we can do to like make the work that we're doing more efficient, because I feel like a lot of times people overlook those things and they just push through, and you just make everything, you just have to like work harder for every little bit, right? It's, you have to go uphill with everything. So for example, like bring my story into this, looking back on it, this is something that I've been trying to just dive into a little bit more over the last year. So it's like my story and stuff like that. And for me, it was like, I told you how I was a skinny kid. So for me, it was, I wanted to be big and muscular. So like for a while, when I first got into it, I wasn't eating enough. Like I wanted to have abs, but I was also like 18 years old. I needed to freaking eat food. So like I wasn't eating enough. So then I hear, hey, you gotta eat to get big. So then I go to college and I'm like, all right, time to eat. So I remember, dude, like it was all about just seeing the scale weight go up. Like I remember every single time I went into to weigh myself, I was like, I got to see the scale go higher. And during this time, like, it's like the scale was going up, but I was accumulating a lot of body fat at the same time. But my digestion also wasn't great. I had a ton of skin issues. I would binge drink on the weekends. I was in college. So it's like all these, I wasn't eating enough protein. My diet quality was crap. And it's, yes, I was like changing my body weight, but from an overall health perspective, I was like trying to force this look of being just super jacked.
You weren't doing the GOMAD, were you, with the gallon of milk a day?
No, but I was eating just a ton of carbs. And again, I just felt like all that stuff led to a lot of those issues. And again, I wanted to have this look right away. And I was trying to force that look. And so that's why I was saying like having this kind of looks first approach can hurt you for those reasons, because I feel like a lot of times we end up kind of partaking in things that aren't great from an overall health perspective. And then you feel like you have to work uphill the entire time. When we can work on our health first, I feel like everything just, it almost feels like you're cruising a little bit more with stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And then with that whole like coaching approach, you're giving people feedback on nutrition, you're giving them training plans, like getting a bit of both, or do they come to you for one or the other typically? Like what is your kind of process or approach or ideal client in that regard?
Ideally would be everything.
Yeah.
Some clients, for example, I just had a consult call with a client today, a potential client, and he feels really good about his training, but he really needs help with nutrition. I do find that people, again, like when I dive into it, if somebody wants to maximize muscle growth and they're like, oh, I'm good with my training, I guarantee you there's at least some things that we can work on to make that process a little bit more efficient, even though at the end of the day, it's like hypertrophy training isn't like some rocket science, but I do feel like people make a lot of easy over things that they just overlook that are simple when it comes to hypertrophy. But again, it is like a lot of people want nutrition, like that's a big one. But again, like for the full package, if we're looking at a body recomp, I feel like everything, like ideally, I would be helping them with that. And so I just tell people like, okay, hey, if you want to do your own training, that's fine. Like I will look over it and tell you what I think. And hey, here's where it's like lacking, right? So like my kind of rule of thumb for training, like again, if a recomp approach is what you want, right? You want to add more muscle, you want to lose more body fat. My kind of rule of thumb is if we looked at your training throughout the entire week, ideally 50% of that training is going to be geared towards some sort of hypertrophy style work, right? If you're somebody like yourself, you really like to lift strong, like you want to power lift, like that's fine. We can fit that in, but we need to make sure we're doing at least 50% like hypertrophy work. Or I get a lot of people that they want to do they like to do like group classes or maybe like CrossFit or something. That's fine. You can do some of that, but we need to make sure that we're doing at least some like structured hypertrophy work here, right? Because again, with like group classes, it's fine, it's exercise, but again, if we're trying to like really add tissue and change our body, it's like that type of training is a little bit limiting because there's no like really form of progression. It's just like random in a way. I don't want to like poo-poo on that stuff because I think it's all great. Like all exercise is great, but yeah. And then you asked me about conditioning, and that's one thing that I've definitely changed my mind in my training and just in general over the last couple of years. And I feel like probably for guys, especially if you've been a lifter, to me, that's one of the big things that I do see that's lacking a lot in like somebody's overall program is conditioning, right? Doing, whether that be like, hey, a couple longer distance cardio sessions per week, or maybe it's like a moderate intensity, like interval style training. But I do feel like too many people overlook the cardio style or the cardio side of things. And to me, that's been something that in my training, it's made a huge difference. And I think that especially for guys, if we're talking guys here, I think that's probably something that is lacking in a lot of guys' programs as well too. And I'm sure you know that working with power lifters and stuff like that, right? Like I feel guys that like to lift really heavy like that, I feel like that's probably that you see lacking there.
It's one of those things oftentimes with clients will be like, so do you want me to look at some of your cardio stuff? Would you like to get in some cardio sessions? And there's some people where it's obviously that's not the goal. And obviously I'm here to help you get towards your goals. But then because I last year documented my journey of chasing some of these hybrid goals where I'd be doing some sort of a run thing with a different lift. Like for instance, I had trying to do a 6-minute mile with a 161 kilo front squat for a 161 because a mile's 1.61 Ks. Like just some fun stuff like that. And I was documenting some of my process of doing that or doing deadlift training plus trying to bring down my half marathon time. And I think that kind of attracted a different demographic of people to look at that because I'm like, it can be done. Like you can do both of these things. But then people will also realize, like, he knows what he's talking about with this. I've seen something change with that. And that was quite an interesting thing. And my background being from athletics is, yes, it's sprinting. And I never particularly liked long distance stuff when I was younger, but running for me is still something that I enjoy as my form of cardio. I know that for someone who is trying to be an elite level powerlifter, obviously we probably don't want to be chucking a whole lot of extra running sessions in or stuff like that. There's probably some better options. But for an everyday athlete who wants to get generally stronger, better shape and wants to do some conditioning and they enjoy being outside running, hey, it's great. It's hardly going to interfere at all. And for someone who's got those sort of goals that might be a little bit more everyday athlete or weekend warrior, we like to call them down here, like those sorts of people, it's going to be a fantastic option. Yes, if you want to be the world champion powerlifter, I'm probably not going to be giving you a 5K, 10K running program to go alongside that. Just putting that caveat out there because you only have so much time to train. And when you put that resource, there's law of diminishing returns, but sometimes those diminishing returns are worth it for some people.
Well, that again, it's like you said there, if somebody wants to be, like you said, champion level power lifter, it's okay. Yeah, we have to be realistic with this. Like you said, you're not going to have them do a ton of cardio because they obviously have to really put in that time. But again, I think that, like you said, if it's done smartly, like I think you can definitely, you can fit it in. And I personally think that it's going to be additive to what we do if we're smart about
How we do
program.
it.
You're not just always going out there to burn the most calories. You're actually being somewhat structured with how you go
Yeah.
about it. But I think it can be additive. And that's why I have found like, I think that sweet spot for, again, people that have normal jobs, they have a life, like 3 to 4 weight training sessions per week that are really focused on hypertrophy. Again, we're talking body recomp specifically here, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
if you want to be like as strong as possible, it's probably going to look slightly different. And then a minimum of, ideally, we would get like 1 to 3 cardio sessions in there, right? And then from there, we also get some activity. For example, you're staying active outside of the gym, like being active with your kids, whatever it may be, like just staying active. So that way you're not just like sitting throughout the entire day
Yeah.
there. And then also if you can, like, if you can play like some sort of sport, I think that could be solid as well. It's like a really, to me, that's a really good rounded program. But obviously, like you said, the thing we need to look for there is the time aspect of it, right? That's going to be the big thing. And it's all those pieces, like how do we fit everything in? Because obviously we all don't have the time. We wish we do, but we don't have all that time. But then really it just comes down to being smarter with what we're doing. And to bring this all back around, this is why I'm a huge fan of like also making sure those things outside of the gym are in check. Because again, like I said, if we're not focused on those things, it's like you have to work, I feel like, even harder in your training to get less return on investment. Whereas if we can get these things outside of the gym dialed in, again, it's just like we can just be way more efficient with our time there. But that's the hard part for people when you have a crazy life, to get that side of stuff dialed in.
Thinking of that whole crazy life and someone chasing body recomp goals, what would, like, in your mind, if you've got someone who's, and I know this is very generic and not going to work out that probably, but hey, we'll give it a nudge. If you have someone who comes to you, say they're mid-30s, they've got 2 kids. I'm not going to make this myself, but let's just pretend mid-30s, they've got 2 kids and they want to get in better shape, been training regularly, those sorts of things. A, what are you looking for in the training that they're doing in order to try and achieve that goal? And then B, how do you make the diet side, what's the word I'm looking for, like enjoyable to stick to as well? Because that's probably one of the things I hear from a lot of people when they're thinking of dieting, is they always think of restrictive things. They always think of things that don't allow them to eat the foods they want. There's all those aspects, but what would you be looking from like for their training week? And then what would you be looking at in terms of like, where is a good place to start for someone who's looking to potentially lose a bit of fat and be able to see some of that muscle, which is probably there, but it has never been their focus, but they've always been lifting.
Yeah. So
question number 1.
in terms of their training, like I said, I want to make sure that we are doing some sort of like progressive overload in our training, or at least at a minimum, I would say at an absolute minimum, 2 days a week. If we can get 3, I think that's solid. I think 3 ends up being really solid. You could get like a really good, like upper lower full body split with that. And my kind of like checklist that I'm looking for within that, I don't know how in depth you want me to go, but it's like, hey, we probably want to hit each muscle group about 2 times a week, which again, you can do that with upper lower full body split, around 6 to 10 sets per muscle group per week, right? Most of our training is going to be in that 5 to 15 rep range. Again, if you're someone that you care a little bit more about max strength, maybe it's a little bit more like some 1 to 5 training in there, maybe like a top set or something like that built in there. And then most of the time we're training like 0 to 3 reps in reserve in our training, right? That's my checklist there of, okay, what does our training look like from a muscle building
that
standpoint?
piece that you jumped into there, and this is just me thinking of this generic person, and what I see when I go to the gym is, and generally people don't seem to be actually pushing that RIR piece is what I see. People will jump on and they'll do a few sets of something. Immediately after the set, they can pick up a conversation or they can happily jump on their phone. It doesn't appear like people, and I don't know if this is something that you typically see from people who train regularly and then wonder why they're not seeing the results. But from a hypertrophy perspective, like I do wonder that, because I'll go and do my accessories and I'm like, geez, I'm tired after this. Like I'm fatigued. And then I see everyone else, and I know that I see everyone else. Obviously, I'm not the only guy working hard. But when I look around, it is one of those things I do wonder how many people are actually pushing to 0 to 3 RIR, like realistically, because a 3 RIR isn't easy. Yes, it's easier than 0, but you still finish a set and you're pretty buggered. Is that one of the things that you typically see when you look at someone who is in the gym and regularly training, but they're not the results?
I do think, like they're not training hard, but I feel like people hear that and they take that the wrong way in terms of what that exactly means. Right? They think that they need to get their heart rate super high and they need to feel super beat up, when it's like, to me, the hard part of hypertrophy training is pushing close to failure, but like maintaining focus, maintaining good technique, and not like, again, your technique doesn't have to be crystal perfect every single rep, but again, you don't want it to deviate too far. And I feel like that's the hard part of it. And it's like pushing through that discomfort at the end of the set. I feel like that's where, versus, oh, hey, I need to train harder, so I'm just going to just do everything.
So minimize my rests and all these things that might not actually be allowing you to get a good training stimulus.
And so there's that. But I also think that comes back to people don't really have a plan that they're following. It's just like random. So I feel like that leads to this mindless kind of like training of you don't really know what you're doing, right? There's no big purpose to it. So you just go in and, oh, hey, I'm getting a pump, or hey, I saw this workout on Instagram today. I'm going to let's go hit this workout. And there's no form of progression with it. So that's the big
So you
piece
might
of
be
it.
training, but you're not doing something that has a structure, and you come back next week and you're doing a similar set of exercises, and you have the opportunity to get better at those things over time.
Because otherwise I feel like you are just random with what you're doing, because I see this all the time with clients. They'll bring it up to me where it's like, if we're doing one exercise and then maybe they don't have access to that equipment for that day because they're super busy, or they like have to change the order of their workout or something. It's like their numbers change big time, right? And so so again, what I'm getting at there is when if you don't have that structure that you follow, I don't like, it's just hard to know like how to progress. And then it's just, you're guessing a little bit more, and then you end up spinning your wheels. And then that just leads to a bigger picture of then you feel like you're just spinning your wheels, and then your motivation towards what you're doing goes down, and then you don't put in your effort into what you should do. So I feel like it's a vicious cycle. And again, I think if we had a game plan, we stuck with that for longer than 2 weeks, we pushed it, I think that would help you train a little bit harder, because the other benefit of that too is then you get an idea of, okay, so last week I did this, so that's probably going to be where I need to be at, or maybe I need to add a rep or add a little bit of weight. And that in turn, for me, that's always been helpful to allow me to push a little bit more, because I know that had I not tracked my workouts, I feel like I would have kept a couple extra reps in the tank, because I'm like, man, this is starting to get hard. But I'm sure you've been there where it's like, hey, I tracked this last week, I need to get 2 more reps. And that kind of helped you get those 2 extra reps. Whereas maybe in the past, if you didn't track it, you wouldn't have gotten that. So
Yeah, you can go, oh, that felt hard, I'll stop there. Yeah.
So
It was quite funny actually with one of the exercises that I did recently. I was lowering the weight per set, and it was because I was training by myself, right? The next week I had a training partner come in with me, and they were like, you don't have to go down. Yes, that was hard, but you've got another set of that. And I'm like, damn it. If it was by myself, and that's probably another thing that could affect people's results, but keeping yourself honest, it's sometimes really easy when you're by yourself to be like, nah, man, that was really hard. But someone else watching, you actually look like you used to do it a couple more. You can do another one there. And they're not being stupid and just bro sesh, like trying to smash you. It was like literally, you have a couple more left. You can keep going. And back to that question as well, sorry, because I know we deviated off there about the RAR conversation, but you mentioned something like an upper lower and then a full body session is something that works as a pretty good 3-day split, 0 to 3 RAR. Were there any other training things before we have a brief talk about what we might be considering as kind of key nutrition principles?
Yeah. Like I said, like before, like we want to, ideally we're getting at least a minimum of 1 to 3 cardio sessions in there as well too. So again, this is all going to come down to time and what somebody can allocate and what their main goals are. Because again, like I said, I know this podcast is Stronger Dad's podcast. So again, men in particular, I feel like could probably use some time focused a little bit more on the cardio side. Ideally, again, we're doing maybe 3 days to start, and then again, like 1 to 3 days of the cardio side of things, where again, it's like a combination of.
Do you separate those out? If so, and this would obviously be dependent on your person, I imagine, to an extent, but typically when you're looking at a training, because obviously if you're doing 3 gym sessions or lift sessions and then 3 cardio sessions, that's 6 training days a week. For some people, that might sound quite intimidating. Do you typically, like in an ideal world, do you split those out? Or sometimes would the cardio be before or after, depending on what type of cardio it is and the time availability?
Yeah, if they have to put them together, as in terms of what the research says, like we want to try to split them up, but as you said there, it's not always going to be feasible to do that. So we try and split them up. If not, to me, at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world if you put them together. I always want to say do the weight training first, because I think that's going to set them up
For
better.
the hypertrophy goal. Yeah.
Because again, the lean body mass is super important. But again, this comes back to like where the person's at, where their cardiovascular fitness is at, and again, where their ultimate goal is, because that's going to determine where we go. And I think the other big thing here is people think that like to build muscle, like they need to end up being this like super jacked bodybuilder and they have to be as big as possible. And it's like, man, you could do really well with 3 days a week of weight training like that. You don't understand like how much you can get out of that. You don't have to necessarily be this like super jacked bodybuilder, right? That's not feasible for a lot of people. But yeah, ideally split it up. But again, sometimes that's going to be the case. And again, this comes back to what can you allocate to the gym? So it's, hey, I can only get to the gym 4 days a week. All right. Then we have to do again, a kind of a cost analysis benefit of which direction we go. Are you more focused on hypertrophy? We probably want to get 3 weight training sessions in there. Do we try to put maybe 1 cardio session in after one of those weight training days? Is that feasible? No, then maybe for you, it's like for right now, we just have to do 1 cardio session a week, and the rest of the time you're getting movement in. So that does become the big time to me, man. Time ends up being the biggest limiting factor for all this, because when it comes to like hypertrophy, cardiovascular fitness, and I don't know so much about strength, but with hypertrophy, it's if we can do more volume and we can recover from it and it's high quality, you probably want to do as much as you can if you really want to continue to build more muscle, right? Same thing with like cardio. Like if you really want to continually improve your cardiovascular fitness, you probably want to continue to do if, again, within reason, as long as you're training
Within
smart.
reason. Yeah. For
But
most of us who are listening, most of us aren't marathon runners who are already running weeks. Yeah.
I think if we can get in a little bit more, it's always going to be better. But time always ends up being the limiting factor. So then you have to break it down to and again, to bring us all back to being a parent, you just have to prioritize certain things at that time. Unfortunately, you can't say yes to everything. You're going to have to say no to some things. And it really just comes down to prioritization and what's the most important to you there.
Yeah.
But in a perfect world, we're looking at 3 to 4 weight training sessions, 1 to 3 cardio sessions, and then steps the rest of the time. But again, like you said, that is not always feasible for people there.
Yeah. And I think part of the other thing that I would say around the conditioning piece as well, and this is something I'm pretty much talking to myself here because I've started to become reliant on doing my conditioning stuff in the gym. You can do conditioning from home.
Yeah.
You can go for a jog from your front door and end up back at your front door. You can go walk some hills if you're in a hilly area and come back. There's those other options, or a bike ride. I've just recently got myself a bike. My wife got me a bike so I can go do some more cycling. I think sometimes being lifters and gym folk who enjoy being in the gym, some people aren't that way inclined, but for me, it's easy to do it in the gym at the end of a session or whatever. So I will do that. But that's not to say that on a day like today where I'm not doing a lifting session, I couldn't go on a 20-minute bike ride out and back and get some cardio in that is good quality. It's a matter of, as you say, if that fits better, you've saved 10, 15 minutes traveling to the gym each way. That's 30 minutes saved. And you've got your session done in a shorter time than you would have even got to the gym and back potentially. So there's those other options, I think, as well, where if we're trying to be time efficient and find ways to stack these things, look for a more simple way to do it. Maybe that's even taking the kid in the pram and pushing them. There's ways that you can incorporate these things into your life, which are easier, still not easy, but easier to do than necessarily having to leave the house and having to do this and go somewhere that is away, spend half an hour there doing your cardio, and then you've spent an hour 15 by the time you get back. Well, you could take half an hour and do that from home. So sometimes there are ways that you can get the win easier.
Yep, exactly. You don't necessarily have to go into the gym there to do that. You can get stuff like I got this stationary bike here. It's been super helpful. So able to do that. So again, stationary bike, like you said, going outside, probably better, a little bit more fun to do it that way.
Yeah, see, I live in a hilly area of town. So I'm up on the hill. And so therefore, whenever I go anywhere and do running or cycling, it's either A, undulating, or B, I have to go down the big hill, which means I have to come back up the big hill, which is, in my mind, it's just one of those little barriers that you have to get over a little bit of a hump mentally to be like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And then once you get back at the end of your session, damn it, now I've got to go up that hill 5 minutes from home. And then if we think about the diet side or nutrition side, I guess probably thinking a little bit around what are some of the keys that you tend to think of with this, and probably almost, to me, almost as important is what are some of the things that are common roadblock people face with nutrition? Because oftentimes it is more challenging to people who are already in the gym, is trying to be on point with the nutrition is harder, right? Because it's something that you have to have consideration of throughout your entire day. Whereas we can all, not all of us, but a lot of people can easily get to the gym, work hard for an hour, do a really good job of the training, but the nutrition's equally as important. So what does that look like for you, and what are some of the typical things you're looking at there?
Yeah. So again, this comes back to having this conversation with the client, but it's okay. So at the end of the day, if we really want to try to get the most out of nutrition, I think spending some time tracking your calories and learning that is going to be huge, right? Again, that's not always feasible for everybody. So from there, we just have to figure out, okay, this is the trade-offs of not doing it that way. But I'm always going to try to get clients I want to teach them how to do that, because again, I feel like a lot of people maybe tried it in the past and it's either been too hard for them, or they're like, it doesn't work for me. But I feel like it's just a lack of knowledge and skill around tracking, because it is a skill. Just like anything, it is a skill that you have to learn. And again, there's ways that are better about learning it, and there's ways that aren't so great either. Again, I'm always like, hey, we want to get this data. It's super important, but if you can't do it, I understand. But if we really want to get the most out of nutrition, tracking our calories and macros is going to give us the most awareness and education around it. But again, that's another thing you have to do there. So again, for some people, that's not feasible. So again, we have to figure out, okay, what are the big rocks on there? But as far as things that I see that are the biggest issues, it's again, not having any sort of plan with nutrition. Again, I'm not saying you need to have every last gram figured out, but if you just go into your day and you can't tell me an idea of how many meals you're going to eat, or what the kind of base of the meal is going to be, man, you're going to struggle. So again, having some sort of game plan around that. I personally, like, my things that I like to do to set up some structure around nutrition are, how many meals can you have? What's a set number of meals that we can have per day? Because that gives you some structure. Like, you don't have to necessarily eat at 7:15 every single day, but it's like, hey, your breakfast is from like 7 to 9, right?
Yeah.
Lunch is from like 12 to 3, somewhere between there, depending on how the day goes. And then you have dinner from 6 to 8. Again, anywhere from, I found, like 3 to 4-ish meals is solid. Some people like a little bit more than that, but that gives you some structure to where, like, you at least have that from day to day, where it's, okay, if I'm super hungry, I know I have another meal coming up in a couple hours. Whereas if you don't have that game plan and you get hungry, it's easy to just be like, shoot, I'm freaking hungry, I got to go and eat now. So you can see things get out of whack. So I like to initially, when I work with client, hey, let's set this up. And again, maybe 90%, like maybe there's a day where you have to do 4. Now you just know you maybe eat a little bit less at each meal because you're adjusting there with that. So that's one of the first things I like to do, is get that set up. And then the next thing we really try to work on too is making sure they are getting enough protein, because again, when we're looking from a body recomp standpoint, like, protein is going to be really important. So the next kind of skills, let's at least make sure we're building each meal around a source of protein there, right? So that's the other big one. Those are probably the 3 big ones. It's like getting some form of tracking going, setting a number of meals per day, and then getting protein. And then we can talk more specific in terms of what else that might look like. But I guess the only other mistake I see made from a nutrition standpoint is people doing these aggressive bulks and cuts. And again, this comes back to people focus on that over what their training looks like, what the like ins and outs of their diet looks like. And then they do these aggressive bulks and cuts that end up leading to worse body composition, right? Because they have these aggressive bulks where maybe they put on a little bit more body fat than they need to, then they want to cut it off. And then in that process, again, maybe they're not focused on the body comp side of things. They lose a little bit of muscle, and you just end up seeing this like worsening of body composition. So I would say that's the other big thing, because a lot of people think they're like too advanced for recomp, when, like I said, I feel like a lot of people have a lot of things they can work on before they need to worry about these like super aggressive like bulks and cuts.
Yeah. Awesome, man. I think that's good information, and probably some stuff that people can have a bit of a think about and almost analyze themselves a little bit. I haven't been thinking about what I've been eating. Maybe I should track in some form. And I think that is probably, you mentioned tracking as a skill, and it's something I've been doing again recently, because I've been wanting to put on weight, but I've been not wanting to just eat absolute garbage the entire time, because that, being a powerlifter back in the day, when, if we're thinking 10, 15 years ago, powerlifters looked a bit different to what they did now. Yes, the elite ones were still pretty lean and that sort of thing, but you talked about eat big to get big. That used to be pretty much the way it is, right? Just pack everything in. And I remember doing these late night shakes, right? And I would literally pour like olive oil into my shake and add a few hundred calories, just pure oil. And I would shake that up and I would just down that before bed. Yes, it was loaded with protein, but there was like oil. There was probably like some sort of Nesquik milkshake powder in there. Said it was palatable, and it was just like, man, like it must have been like 500 to 1,000 calorie dump right before bed, with pretty much no fiber, minimal goodness, but it was calories and protein. And that was just what I was like, I want to get to 93 kilos. I'm going to get there. I don't care if I'm fat. And so it's been an interesting process in between that, where I have actually done some tracking and been like, and I think, as you say, like, one of the things I think people often think with tracking is that once you start, you have to do it forever. But it's one of those things that I think, from an education perspective and learning about food choices and what kind of has higher protein and lower protein, and you have these inbuilt things where you're like, I think this meal that I've eaten here has really good protein content. And then you actually chuck it through the thing, it's only got 15, 20 grams. I wanted 30 or 40 from this meal. So what do I need to change in that meal in order to increase that? And that's why I, every now and again, will like to do some form of tracking. Predominantly for me, it's when I'm actually trying to lose a little bit of weight, because I don't want to sacrifice too much muscle mass when I'm doing that. So otherwise I would go into what you talked about, super aggressive. I would cut heaps of stuff, and I would, back very simple. I might cut heaps of carbs, but not cut my protein. And then suddenly I'm, eating no calories. And so for me, it's been one of those educational type pieces for myself, that I already know a lot of this stuff around what I should be consuming, but actually, when you lay it out there as to what am I actually doing, you learn a lot about the meals that you're consuming, what you could add, what you could take away. And then also, for me, it's just an element of having a bit of control in what's coming in. So I've always found it really helpful, and I don't think it's something you have to do forever, but you can learn, and then you might be able to have a relatively similar eating pattern for a period of time, and you might come back and track a few months later if you need to, or you might be the type of person that, to keep honest with yourself, you prefer to track all the time. But it's hard that way, because you can get quite, not addicted, but a bit like,
like
caught up in
OCD
that trap.
Yeah.
And then you can't even go out for meals and things like that. And it's actually, there's a happy medium here, but it is, for some people, hard to have, because you might get quite neurotic about it.
I don't know if I've read this on Mass or where I've read this at, but thought around that. It's like, oh, that's just going to lead to disordered eating, which certainly can. But I think they said, is it the people is that because they've already are that way and they're more likely to get that way? Or did that cause it? It's this whole conversation that I'm sure that who knows the answer to, right? But that is definitely something that you definitely want to look out for. And again, to bring this back to my kind of philosophy on things, that's why the mindset side of things is also super important, because if we're noticing those tendencies, it's like we got to work on that, because and some of the stuff you may have to refer out to. I don't want to say, oh, hey, we can fix everything for you, but it's like that is part of the mindset side of things. If that's off, that's going to be something that's going to hold you back. So maybe that's the thing that we need to work on from a mindset standpoint too. Yeah,
it gets pretty deep, hey? And I think that's the challenge with all of this stuff and being a coach, is there's a whole lot more to it than just knowing your macros or knowing the training splits. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that for someone to be successful in one of these approaches is you're dealing with a human, and humans have thoughts, feelings, emotions, reasons for doing things, motivations, and like all of that stuff comes into play in terms of what that end outcome is going to be. But I do realize the time at the moment, mate, we are a wee bit over what I had put in your calendar. So we'll jump into those final three if that is good for you. Was there anything you wanted to add before we jump into those?
No, man, it's been super fun so far. No, nothing else I want to add. Just, everything. I agree with everything you said, and hopefully some people were able to get some stuff out of that information there.
Yeah, cool, man. And as I say, I didn't know that was the direction we're going to head today, but I think it's cool I thought it'd be interesting to actually chat through what it means, right? Rather than just surface level touch on this is what you do. Okay, what does this really look, and how do we go about doing that? Because there are probably people listening who, body recomposition, better physique, it's definitely something that I think a lot of people have as a goal, as part of their training, comes back to that aesthetic piece, which is something that I think everyone, deep down, if we're honest, it is something we consider. If I can see some bigger shoulders and some better arms when I'm wearing my singlet at the gym, man, I'm happy.
Yep. Exactly.
Doesn't matter if, strength isn't everything, man. There are other bits to this. And I always say, man, you can win the battle in the warm-up room if you have bigger biceps. So that's why biceps curls are important, because if someone sees bigger arms, it's a little bit of an intimidation factor, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah. Who knows?
Cool, man. Let's jump into those final three. So the first one that we have here is, what's one key tip or piece of advice for new dads, especially the first few years? And for you, probably we'll be talking first few months here.
First few months. Yeah. Shit isn't going to be perfect. So I think being okay with that, and like having non-negotiables for your day of, hey, here's the important things for me. And then being willing to adapt if need be. But I think having those kind of core pieces of what's most important to you, I think, is the big thing there.
Man, I think that's pretty good advice. And then the second one that we have here is, what is the most helpful new habit or practice that you've adopted in the last year or so? So a fairly recent new thing, and it doesn't have to be related to your parenting or your training.
Yep. So I feel like just really my routine around sleep. So like what helped me with the newborn was somewhat consistent routine, right? Around sleep. Again, understanding that's not going to be perfect, but still trying to have some sort of routine of, okay, hey, I'm still waking up at relatively the same time. Don't stay up too late. Okay, if it's time to go to bed, try to go to sleep a little bit earlier. I don't know if you can hear my dog. I apologize if you can. Keep your room nice and cool. Avoid lights overnight. Like when the baby wakes up, try to avoid those like bright lights. Watch your caffeine intake. And then two supplements that were really helpful were creatine and rhodiola. Rhodiola helped to combat fatigue there with that. So that's been like the big kind of really focusing on my sleep. I feel like really helped me during that time.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and I think that whole having the habit and having the routine. I got sent a funny meme yesterday from one of my clients, and it's like a take the mickey thing about staying up late and how they can give you your own time as a parent. But yeah, I'll send it to you and you can have a laugh at it after this. Okay. Sorry, listeners, I'm not going to be able to send that to you. And then the last question that we have here, are there any book and or podcast recommendations? And feel free to do some self-promotion of your podcast as well.
Yeah, there's a great one. No, real quick, books. I really like Gap in the Game, Indistractable, and Comfort Crisis. I think those are three great books there. I know you asked for one, but you're getting three.
It's fine.
And then, man, there's so many good podcasts. I like, obviously listen to this one. I like Revive Stronger. I think that's solid if you're into like hypertrophy and stuff like that. But yeah, those are my main ones. And then my podcast is the Mind Muscle Connection podcast, if anybody's interested in that. I'm not saying that you need to listen to it, but you said some self-promotion. So I figured I would go over it real quick.
Cool, man. And then where can people find you if they're looking to learn more from you?
Yep. So obviously Mind Muscle Connection podcast, which Hayden was on, we said, I think episode 542. So definitely check that out.
That's what I wrote down.
And then Instagram, Jeff, HOEHN_. And those are the two best places to find me.
Awesome, mate. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate you spending some time with us and going a wee bit over today for our scheduled time. It's always appreciated, but when we get yarning, it's sometimes hard to keep it short.
Yep. No, man, it was great. Really appreciate you having me on. It's an honor to be on. So really appreciate it.